This is Relationscapes, the podcast where we explore the long and winding roads of human identity and connection. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode is trans author and advocate Ben V. Greene.
People always say I'm grieving my child, I'm grieving the person I lost, and I had a really hard time hearing that. I had been the same person this whole time. I was just sharing something true about myself with the people I loved, and they told me it felt like I killed someone. And yes, there are things that are going to change, but this whole story is not about taking down pictures from your walls. This whole journey is about replacing those pictures with new ones in which everyone feels seen.
Our understanding of gender identity seems to be expanding faster than ever, much to the relief of many trans people who've otherwise had to hide who they were. For others, these changes can feel disorienting, even for people who want to support and embrace change. When a young person comes out as trans, many parents and caregivers describe feeling grief as if they've lost someone. Some express feeling afraid for their child, especially because of rising anti-trans rhetoric and policies. Ben Greene offers a reframe. This moment doesn't have to be about grief. It can be about clarity, about truly seeing a young person. And instead of surrendering to fear, we can meet this moment with courage, speaking up, advocating, and making room for trans youth to flourish. Ben Greene wrote the book that I recommend first to anybody who wants to learn more about how to support trans lives. The book is called My Child is Trans, Now What? A joy-centered approach to support. Ben Greene joins us to talk about how to transition away from uncertainty and fear toward connection and love and advocacy right now. Ben Greene, welcome to Relationscapes.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
First question, what question are you kind of tired of hearing people ask you? Are there any questions where you're like, I get this so often, what is happening?
You know, I'm tired of just getting asked repetitive questions, I think, because I do this day in, day out. Today I've got events from around 9 a.m. until 11 p.m. And so questions like, why does somebody use they, them pronouns? I love that you're asking. I love you for asking. Thank you. Oh my gosh, I literally can walk away from my body while I answer that question. I like when people ask me weird or confusing or personal. I like when people ask questions in a strange and interesting new way.
Okay. Is there a question that you wish more people would be asking right now? Because sometimes you might get some questions that, you're just kind of used to answering. What's a rare question that you wish more people would bring to you?
Yeah. I am perpetually wishing that more people would ask, what can I do? Getting involved in allyship and advocacy, or people were asking more about the good stuff about being trans.
Mm-hmm.
They expect me to be suffering and struggling on, constantly crying. And I'm like a dog. I'm just so happy to be anywhere all the time.
Okay. Well, hey, let's talk about the first time that you came out publicly then as trans. This is when you were 15 years old. You write about this in the book, and you were giving a presentation in health class. Take us to that moment and how you talked about what it meant to be trans to a room of kids who probably didn't really know anything about it.
Mm-hmm. So my junior year health class, we had this project where every student picked a topic that had somehow connection to health. It could be drug use, it could be exercise, anything. And you made a 15-minute presentation about it. And I had already started to come out to a couple of my friends and said, I'm going to do a presentation on what it means to be transgender because I know nobody knows anything about what's going on here. So I made this whole presentation, and the first slide had my birth name on it, and it said, okay, I'm so-and-so, and I'm giving this presentation. And the last slide of the presentation, I was going to have the title slide again and say, I know all this because actually my name is Ben and I'm transgender. And when I tell you, I deleted and re-added that slide to my presentation 900 times in the 2 hours before my presentation.
Wow.
It just delete, control Z, delete, control Z. I was freaking out about it. And then I did it and word spread and people started reaching out to me. Oh my God, I heard what you did. That's so crazy. And it was mostly really positive. Most of the guys at the school wanted nothing to do with me, but most of the girls and other trans and queer students were really Wow, this was just so cool.
You used this chair analogy, right, in the presentation to help people understand. That's really helpful. Tell us about the chair analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the really short version of the chair analogy, which if you want the longer version, you can either check out my book or I have a TED talk called Where Are You Sitting? Basically says your gender identity is your internal sense and your biological sex is about your body. We're all born sitting into one of two types of chairs, firm, tall stool and a soft, squishy armchair. Some people don't notice the chair they're sitting in after you've been sitting for long enough. It just feels comfortable. They're cisgender. They stay in the chair they're sitting in forever. Some people are really uncomfortable for whatever reason. They have gender dysphoria. So they move chairs. They identify as transgender. They say the chair that I was born into was not comfortable and I'd like to sit somewhere else. As it turns out, there's a whole IKEA. People want to sit in a rolly chair or a stool or all different kinds of chairs that fall under the umbrella of non binary, which just means not exactly an armchair or a stool. And there's no right or wrong way for someone to sit in their chair. All that matters is that you feel comfortable where you're sitting. So I used that analogy from the very beginning of my transition. I still give that in all my presentations. I lean on that analogy. And I find that, most of us can relate to sitting down. It's one of my personal favorite hobbies.
I like that it gives you the opportunity to talk about the difference between gender identity and gender expression as well.
Yes, absolutely. Our identity is just this fundamental comfort, and it can mean anything to you that you want it to mean. Where gender expression is here's how I'm dressing, here's how I'm wearing my hair. And gender expression categories are highly cultural, and I think a lot of them are very funny. I remember when I came out, I was like, okay, mom, I have to get rid of all these girly shower products. No more lavender, eucalyptus, like the whole beautiful Amazon rainforest sitting in my shower. I need the 19-in-1 Axe wet steel worker.
Guy soap.
That's my deodorant right now is called Bear Claw.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a real Bear Claw smells good, but that's the man scent, I guess.
Yeah.
Sell it out of the grocery store.
Yeah, that's important to keep in mind because we make snap judgments about people based on their appearance that isn't always right. And I think for me, it's made me less inclined to gender people like that. I've tried to just gender people less like, hello, sir, hello, ma'am, or things like that. And I've found over time that's become less of a reflex for me.
Absolutely. And right, it's situational. If I get in an Uber and I've got an elderly black woman driving a car, I'm going to call her ma'am. I live in Missouri. That is just the way that we show respect. But I'm talking about my barista. I am not going to assume my Starbucks barista's pronouns. You gotta, learn how to walk the walk.
Yeah. Okay, so talk about how you first started experiencing gender dysphoria, how you came to understand yourself as trans. I like how the book emphasizes social and physical dysphoria.
Yeah. So, truthfully, I'll never exactly know when it started because I didn't have access to the language.
Mhm.
For most of my childhood, I did not identify as a boy. I did not identify as masculine. I identified as weird. I knew that I was not good at being a girl. I thought it was because I wasn't good at being a person, and I just
Mm.
accepted that I was weird. I went to a princess dress-up party, not dressed up as a prince, but dressed up as Stitch, the space alien with 6 arms and laser guns, and that was my gender at the
Stitch
time.
rules.
Yeah, I loved Stitch. I wore that costume for like 8 years in a row. So I knew I was weird, and then puberty started to set in, and then I really knew something was wrong
Mm.
theoretically. I knew that I was miserable, and I tried to talk to adults about it to just say, "Hey, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't really feel like it's supposed to be happening." But the way that the adults around me talk about puberty is, God, everybody hates puberty. Puberty is the worst, right? They called middle school puberty jail, which is hilarious, and also meant that I assumed all of my peers were depressed and anxious and suicidal and just wanted to do anything to stop puberty because that was how we talked about it. I didn't know they were excited about the changes they were experiencing, even if they were bittersweet. And so I had this pain, still didn't have the words for it. I realized recently, I used to say that onset of puberty, that physical dysphoria, that's when I knew something was wrong.
Mm.
But my parents recently sold their house, and I was going through all the old papers to help them get ready to move. And I had a letter I had written to myself in third grade to be given to myself at my high school graduation. And the opening paragraph said, "Let's get one thing straight. You will never like pink. You will never wear a dress. You will never be a girl."
Mm.
And it breaks my
Wow.
heart to think about not just that I was having those feelings so young and didn't know how to talk about it, but that I showed that letter to so many adults. That had to be shown to my parents before I handed it to my teacher, who gave it to my health teacher, who gave it to my middle school health teacher, who gave it to my homeroom teacher. All these adults who, had they had the language, could have stepped in and said, hey, it seems like you might be struggling. Do
Mm.
you know there could be another way if you're having a hard time? And I don't fault them for that. They had no idea either. But, I'll never know for sure when I started to feel that way. But as my body started to change more, as I started to learn the words dysphoria and transgender and euphoria, I started to feel very closely aligned, right? The words unlocked that closet door. They finally gave me the permission to start describing my experiences. The words did not make me transgender. I was just more scared and alone. They gave me permission to be transgender.
So what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your social dysphoria was with you for a long time, and that maybe more physical dysphoria related to your body really started hitting you more around puberty then. But the social dysphoria is something that I think is often overlooked. It's just the pain of not being seen by other people.
Yeah.
You say it's the sort of feeling alien, feeling different, feeling out of place.
Yeah, absolutely. And social dysphoria is made a lot worse by things like misgendering and people using the wrong name, or people being unkind or hateful, or just hearing people talk about anti-trans legislation, right? All these
Mm.
things contribute to social dysphoria. And I like to differentiate them for me in that if I'm on a desert island, I'm probably not having social dysphoria because I see myself as I am,
Yeah.
but I'm still having physical dysphoria because
Uh,
I'm still in this body, right? I'd still be trans outside of a society. It would look different. It would probably hurt less,
yeah.
but I would still be trans.
And we'll talk a little bit later on about some of the things trans folks do with both of these types of dysphoria. But right now, I also want to point out that your book doesn't start off by trying to prove the existence of trans people. It's not citing all the studies or making an argument that people should believe trans people. You start from the beginning with an assumption of the existence of trans people. Talk about that decision to dive in that way.
I wrote this book. I had been working on it for about 6 years. It's been a long time coming. And I wrote it because I was really frustrated at the number of books that did not take trans people at their word, that did not take trans perspectives into account. Most books out there for parents of trans kids are written by cisgender people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know plenty of really tremendous cisgender allies who are humble, who have the ability to be corrected. A lot of them are wonderful, and there are a lot of people who don't have people giving them that feedback writing these books. So a lot of these books are really grounded in doubt, in grief, in fear, and that's kind of the whole story that a lot of books out there tell. Not all, and I'm not going to name any names because that's not helpful for anybody.
Do
I
it.
don't think it's being
I
malicious.
want the clicks. Let's get.
I don't think anybody's being malicious,
Yeah.
but I do think parents then thought that was the only way they could feel
Mm.
of, well, I'm not sure, right? My parents, I found out recently, they called up one of their friends who did like LGBT youth counseling. He's a cisgender gay man. And they called him up and they said, hey, our kid is trans. What should we do? And he said, it's really important to love your kid no matter what and know that this will pass. This is a phase.
Oh.
And he was like a well-established mental health advocate for LGBTQ youth and was like, don't worry, it's going to go away. And that framework is something that a lot of people have taken. And most of the books out there aren't explicitly saying, don't worry, your kid's not really trans, but they do spend a lot of time being like, well, your kid doesn't know what they're doing. Let's talk to the cisgender people. Let's talk to the real experts on trans experiences, not trans people.
And I think it's really important to point out there are two levels happening in that kind of response. The one level is kind of dismissing the kid's own perspective and ideas, right? And that, not taking a kid seriously. Thinking about it as a phase. But secondly, I do think that underneath that is a fear of trans people, a negativity about trans people, that being trans or having these, or even gender dysphoria or even gender exploration is a bad thing. And don't worry don't worry because you should be worried.
Yeah, my hot take here is that everybody loves to say, I support my kid because they're born this way. Born this way is right, hammered into the nail. It's an amazing Lady Gaga song. And we say that we support our kids because they're born this way. The underlying assumption there is that I know that if you could do anything else, you would. I know you wouldn't choose this, even though this is a terrible path, because this is the only one you could do.
Mm,
I will support you. And while, yes, I do think I was born this way, I do think that I am transgender and nothing can change that about me. I don't think the reason to support me is because I'm in an immutable worst case scenario.
mm,
I love being trans. And there, a lot of parents do have a lot of fear of, I don't want my kid to have a bad life. And sometimes that might lead them to be hesitant or even outright rejecting because they just are so worried for the life their kid might have.
mm.
So centering joy is all like big focus of my book of just saying like, hey, it's not a bad life. It's not a bad thing to be trans.
Yeah, this is exactly where I wanted to go with this. The subtitle of your book, A Joy-Centered Approach to Support. I
Yeah.
love it. You talk about gender euphoria, about how good it feels to feel seen, how
Mhm.
good it feels to accept, to become more accepting of your body or to find ways to be comfortable with yourself. And the question that comes to mind then is, what about toxic positivity?
Mm.
I could see some people being tempted to jump right to that whenever heartache comes up or whenever, when people deal with real struggles to be like, well, you know what, we just need a joy-centered approach. Let's skip over that. And I don't see you doing that, but I'd like to hear you unpack how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the idea of centering joy means recognizing that we are building something and that's going to have challenges. But when the center of our approach is fear, right? Good things and bad things are going to happen either way. I live in Missouri. I don't have any sand left in which to bury my head. I
Yeah.
know bad things happen. So we know good and bad are going to happen. When we have a fear-centered approach, which is what a lot of people have, they are constantly motivated by, I'm worried for my kid. I need to join PFLAG because I'm afraid. I need to go testify because I'm angry. I
Mhm.
need to move. I am constantly worried. And that makes it really hard for us to let our kids be joyful, let our kids be kids, right? Fear can only carry us so far. It's
Mhm.
not a sustaining emotion. You can't build a home in fear. When I center joy, what I mean is I'm always thinking about not just reacting, not saying what are the things I'm afraid of, who are the people I don't want in office, what are the bills that are going to hurt me, but what am I moving towards? What am I fighting for? What am I trying to build with my child?
And maybe what do I have right now?
Exactly. Yeah. People always say, I'm grieving my child. I'm
Mm,
grieving the person I lost. And I had a really hard time hearing that
mm,
when I was a kid because I felt like I had been the same person this whole time. I was just sharing something true about myself with the people I loved. And they told me it felt like I killed someone.
mm.
I didn't understand that. And yes, there are things that are going to change. There are things that you might lose. But a joy centered approach means saying this whole story is not about taking down pictures from your walls and leaving a house full of sun faded rectangles. This whole journey is about replacing those pictures with new ones in which everyone feels seen. Balancing out and choosing to make joy the focal point, recognizing there are going to be challenges, but joy is the way forward, is the way I say, what are the bills I would like to fight for? What do I want to see? What do I dream of for my kid? And that, as a sustaining emotion, will take us so much further than fear or anger ever could.
Okay, here's a footnote question, super quick. Have you thought about leaving Missouri? Why stay?
Yeah, I thought about that all the time. We love to say, put your oxygen mask on first
Mhm.
before helping others. But right now, the bills in Missouri focus on trans youth. I'm sitting on a plane. I can't get my oxygen mask on. Michael Phelps is sitting next to me. That man's aquatic. He can hold his breath for like 10 minutes. He can help me put my oxygen mask on, and nothing bad will happen to him.
Huh.
Right now in Missouri, I can hold my breath and nothing bad will happen to me. I don't feel like I'm here hurting myself for the sake of other people. And I would be okay with that too, by the way. But I'm willing to take these risks to be here fighting while these kids are struggling, while the most vulnerable members of our community are suffering. So I have this privilege and these resources and
Mm.
a talent at getting through to legislators that I want to use this for as long as I can hold my breath. That might change. But for right now, Missouri's a good state of good people that's just gerrymandered into oblivion. But there are trans kids here who shouldn't have to leave their friends and their schools and their hobbies and their very reasonable housing prices just because some stupid cattle rancher, and I'm not exaggerating, many of our legislators are cattle ranchers when they're not legislating. Some stupid cattle rancher doesn't get what it means to be non-binary. They shouldn't get to chase me out. I don't want to let them win.
I like this because you're suggesting we check our oxygen levels and pay attention to those.
Mhm.
And I like that approach because you're not passing judgment over people who don't do the same that you do. And you're seeing that they're are going to be different needs, different approaches. And yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You got to do what you got to do to keep yourself safe.
Yeah. Okay. So the most important thing in the book, and you start off with this, and you say, if you could get one point through to people, this is what you want, is to listen. And I think that actually runs against most people's instincts. Most people might not think that. When I say that, they might be like, oh, wait, we all think listening is important. Well, here's the thing. We're talking about trans kids especially, right? And I think when it comes to kids, people often think the kids are just too ignorant or inexperienced to have a say or to have a reasonable or meaningful opinion about this. And you say, actually, the first step is to start listening to these kids.
Yeah, your kid is the leading expert on themselves and their needs. My goal, the goal of gender affirming healthcare and physicians and all these resources, the goal is to provide a toolbox, not a blueprint. Only your kid can tell you what they want to do with the tools available to them. So the best we can do is have conversations, let them know they're allowed to give feedback, allowed to make requests, allowed to change their mind and question things and be uncertain and be curious and explorative. People have this feeling that a kid can't possibly know. Kids know who they are. There is a tremendous amount of data proving that. But when I lean too hard into the data, I'm saying, don't worry, I know you can trust kids because an adult said it. Trust the adult. At some point, we have to change our a little bit more of our kind of fundamental worldview and saying, I can trust this kid to tell me what they need. If I teach them what it means to advocate, I teach them, hey, this is a serious decision. Let's talk about how we make serious decisions, right? It doesn't mean that you don't parent them anymore, but it does mean that they know their needs better than anybody else. We just have to help teach them how to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about how important it is to listen with empathy and to be flexible, because as you point out, kids are exploring who they are at this point. And as a parent or a caregiver or a friend, we can think of ourselves as being with them on that journey rather than controlling that journey. And as a parent or as someone who's really responsible for a kid, that maybe can be one of the hardest things about it, is relinquishing that sense of needing to control and protect and mold and shape this young child.
Yes, definitely. A lot of fear that parents have of like, but I don't want it to be hard for them. I want to protect them. And if they change their pronouns today, it's going to be harder. Or if my trans daughter doesn't want to grow her hair out, it's going to be harder. And at some point, we have to recognize, even though our options are to change my kid or change the world, and one of them feels a lot easier, only one of them is going to make your kid feel loved. No matter how much love you have in your heart, trying to change your kid so the world is less hard on them is only going to make the world harder on them. We got to fight to change the world instead.
That's Ben Greene, and we're talking about his book, My Child is Trans, Now What? A Joy-Centered Approach to Support. Ben's also a guest lecturer on diversity, equity, and inclusion at Cornell and serves on the advisory board of Tufts University's master's degree in diversity, equity, and inclusion. He speaks all over the place, mentioned the Missouri State Capitol, also presentations to 115 PFLAG chapters for free throughout the country, does a ton of activism and outreach. You can follow Ben at bgtranstalks.com, also has a Substack, Good Queer News, a new Substack that just came out. Ben, let's talk about, speaking of coming out, let's talk about coming out. You discovered that coming out isn't something that just happens once. As a cisgender person, I didn't really ever have to come out in this regard in any real serious type of way. I imagine it as like, okay, a person announces that they're trans or that they're gay or whatever they're coming out as, and then the world just sort of knows. You point out that it's important to keep in mind that coming out's an ever ongoing process, and there are different ways that coming out works and stuff like that. So talk about coming out as a process.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an ever evolving, and there are a lot of people who feel very entitled to know about the histories and identities of trans people. I have a lot of people who have found out that I'm trans and feel almost betrayed that I didn't tell them right away, which is really interesting because, I've got a couple of friends who are much less public about their identities than I am, right? It's very hard for me to talk about myself without talking about being trans because it's my job and it's my book interests and, right, it's a big part of me. That's okay. But I've got other friends who are just law students or medical students and are just like, yeah, that's my medical history. You don't need to know what surgeries had just because we're hanging out right now. But it's constant, right? I went on a business trip recently. So I got in the Uber and the Uber driver said, okay, we're going to the airport. What are you traveling for? And I have to decide, can I say I'm going to give a presentation on trans inclusion for mental health workers in Vermont? Then I get to the conference or I get to the hotel. I'm editing my slides in the lobby. Somebody sits down at my table. Oh, what you working on? Gotta decide again. Can I say I'm editing my slides to talk about trans inclusion? Then I get up on a stage in front of 150 people and have to say, hey, everybody, I'm transgender. You didn't know that about me. Then I go out to dinner with one of the people who hosted me for the event and their partner and a couple of friends who are in town. And I say, hey, I'm transgender. That comes up while we're hanging out because that's the work I do. We're all talking about our jobs and why I'm in town. So I am constantly coming out. And when I'm home in St. Louis, my wife will bring over new friends from school and we'll have to do a little bit of a vibe check of, okay, does it seem like they'd be okay with knowing what my work is, or should I tell them my fake job? And I have a whole fake persona that I draw on when I don't feel safe or comfortable to talk about my actual story.
Yeah, so it's coming out like as a youngster you came out, we talked about your health class, but now it's just something that you continue to face. And a lot of people, a lot of trans folks experience the same thing. And you mentioned you have this fake thing. I would imagine that can happen in circumstances where you don't feel as safe, or where maybe you don't have the emotional resources. You just don't want to go into it at any time. There can be different reasons. But you do talk about fear of coming out as something that people face, whether they're coming out kind of for the first time to people or whether they're coming out after they've known people. Talk about that fear that people experience.
Yeah. The key, the center of that fear is that when we are trying to figure out who can and can't I come out to, for so many people, we can't afford to guess wrong. And so we wait. That was why I waited 8 months to come out to my parents, not because they were clearly antagonistic, but because they hadn't found a way to indicate to me or known it was important to indicate to me that they would be supportive. Every person I meet, I am collecting so much data. What pins do they have on their backpack? What jokes do they laugh at? What do they mention they did over the weekend? Or do they have any thoughts on the Pride Parade coming up?
Didn't your parents like say stuff about Caitlyn Jenner or something? And you
Yes.
didn't realize it was for political reasons, and you were like, "Oh yeah."
Which turns out she's just very annoying and I don't like her either. But I thought like she was the only trans person I had seen them
Yeah.
react to. So I assumed they were unsupportive and I couldn't afford to guess wrong. So there is this constant fear and monitoring and data collection of, are you going to be okay? Do I have enough evidence that I think this is a safe thing to share with you?
I think some parents might feel, or some parents, loved ones, friends might feel, you mentioned betrayed or feel like, oh, how come you didn't tell me? They might take it personally, like, well, I'm a trustworthy person. Why? I can't believe they didn't feel that I was, ready to hear this or something. What do you say to folks like that have that kind of trepidation?
Yeah, the first thing I do is recognize that we gotta have some humility. You might not have been told because you made a mistake. You made an offensive joke, or you laughed about Caitlyn Jenner, or what it is, or your loved one had no idea that you were gonna be supportive, or they had their own stuff going on.
Yeah.
For a lot of my real early days, I just did not know for sure. And I really was nervous that I was gonna have to come out and then it would lock me into an identity. So it's not all about you. Don't take it all personally, and recognize that we're humans, which means we are going to make mistakes. If you can look back and say, okay, I know it was this thing, or you can ask your loved one if that's part of your relationship, hey, seems like you waited kind of a while to tell me. Is there something that I did, or especially something I continue to do, that might not give off the inclusive signal that I think it is? Because I want to be better. And we might have these regrets, and regret is a great emotion because it lets us know we have grown. You would not regret it if you were still the same person who did that thing.
I like that you said you didn't want to feel locked in either. I think about maybe some supportive parents might go way supportive in ways that the kid's like, well, hold on, hold on. Like, I'm still trying to figure this out. So it seems like you kind of have to thread the needle of feeling out what the person needs to feel supported, because you also don't want them to feel locked in or trapped into something, or that if you're so happy and express such love for them for being trans, maybe they thought they were a trans girl, but they come to think of themselves more as non-binary, but then they feel weird talking to you about that because you're their trans daughter now, and that was so important to you. So it just seems like you really have to be in tune with the kid and let them lead.
Exactly. Let your kid lead the way. Now, that doesn't mean saying to them like, oh, I support you so much, it's okay if you change your mind, because that might send a message of like,
I
I'm
hope you
counting
do.
on this being a phase.
Yeah.
But having those moments of celebration where we say, I'm going to get you a gender re-reveal cake, or I'm going to get you a new skincare kit. We're going to go get our nails done. Or like my dad inviting me to have my first beer with the guys, like that. It's so affirming, and it's okay to make space for it to change, to have those conversations, but celebrating, leaving room for curiosity and questioning, we do have to kind of toe the line and trust our kids to lead the way.
I like your suggestion to sometimes ask before asking particular things because,
It's
as you mentioned, a lot of trans people have to become experts on everything to the people that are around them, and there's a lot of questions and there's pressure to answer them. And you say, hey, sometimes somebody just might not be up to talking about it, and it's okay to check in and be like, hey, is that all right if I ask you about this? Or, before you just dive right in.
Yeah, people really, from the second I came out at 15, were like, okay, great. This guy's the expert. I was writing school policy. I was teaching our health classes. I was answering constant questions around what's this identity? Why would somebody use this label? And like, I wasn't an expert by default. RuPaul did not come down my chimney and say, Encyclopedia of Gay, slay, queen. RuPaul has more important things to do. I was not an expert at the time, but I was forced to be that way because everybody kept asking. So I grew up, I became really patient, really well spoken. Now I'm an expert by trade. Not everybody wants to study transgender inclusion just to come out as trans and go to their job or hang out with their friends or their family. So giving that little bit of preface or answer like really personal questions. Strangers ask me about my genitals. Usually that's socially frowned upon, but it's acceptable when somebody is trans. So just saying, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question about, your transition, about your coming out process, about language and terminology? Give a little preface that lets somebody know they can say, I'm not the right person for that. I came out 2 minutes ago and I'm 8. I don't know what's going on. Or like, I'm tired. Let's talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Giving people the space to say no is a great way of establishing ourselves as allies who are receptive to feedback and just avoid some of those uncomfortable situations.
I also like the advice to ask yourself why you're asking before you go to start a conversation. Like, why do I want to know this? Is this important information? Is this because I want to help this person or want to understand more? Or is it just curiosity and like, what am I trying to do when I ask questions?
Yeah. And listen, curiosity is not a bad thing. The fact that you are wondering and wanting to learn more is pretty much always good. But sometimes you have to say, I'm not going to be able to get an answer to that question, right? Sometimes I see a couple in public that is super weird PDA. I do not know their vibe is. I want to know their story so badly, and I cannot ask. I never we accept that life is going to be full of little mysteries of humans being weird and we don't know them. Now, there are other ways to learn, right? There are amazing documentaries like Will and Harper on
Mhm.
Netflix. Outstanding documentary. Lots of memoirs and stories and novels written by and about transgender people. There are so many ways to satisfy that curiosity itch if, the person you're talking to doesn't want to share their whole story. So it's always great to be curious. We just have to ask ourselves, is this person the right person for this question?
What about when people feel like they made a mistake? They might have made a transphobic joke or said something insensitive or overstepped a boundary when they're asking questions. What do you suggest people think about in cases of messing up?
So again, regret is a beautiful emotion. It means you have grown. Even if it's instantaneous that you say something and immediately regret it, in that moment, that means you grew. So recognize that I am a person. I have just made a mistake. Okay, a mistake is not a moral failing. It's an action item. So I want you to ask yourself, why did I make that mistake? Make sure you understand why it was hurtful, and then understand how can I do differently in the future. Maybe you made a joke you thought was perfectly benign, and you can tell from somebody's eyebrows that it was not.
Mhm.
You don't know exactly why. You could say, I can tell that that joke did not land well. I want to make sure that I understand why that didn't land well. Could you help me understand that? Could you help me understand? Have I said something that was upsetting to you? If you're not sure,
I would
make
also add too to say, like, if you don't want to tell me, your signal is enough. That's not a joke I'm going to be making anymore. I actually don't really need to understand. I can figure that out. If you don't want to talk to me about it, I'll go do some homework.
absolutely, because they are already upset at us. So we don't want to, poke the bear too much. So saying, I need to understand why it was hurtful and I need to make steps to not do it again. Because an apology doesn't mean anything if you do the same thing 5 minutes from now, right?
Yeah.
People who mess up my pronouns all the time, they would always say, I'm trying, I'm sorry. And I could learn to tell very quickly the difference between I'm trying as an adjective and I'm trying as a verb.
Mm.
Some people just liked to say, I'm trying, and then they would get my pronouns wrong every single other time I spoke to them. And other people were trying. They were putting in the effort. They would correct themselves. They would practice when I wasn't around. they got better much quicker than my trying as an adjective family members did. And I had infinite patience for people who were trying as a verb, very little patience for those who were trying as an adjective.
Mm.
So recognizing we have to take steps to get better, and better is going to be a constant. There will always be mistakes we'll make, always be things we can do better in the future. But all you can ask of yourself is to be a little better tomorrow than you were today.
Yeah, and I think we should roll that into general human interaction, because some people might get the impression that trans folks are overly sensitive or making a big deal out of things that they shouldn't. That's easy to think when you're not part of a marginalized population, but we need to take it seriously and also recognize, well, I could make a bad joke they didn't like about all kinds of things. I could make a hurtful joke about different things that rubs them the wrong way. It's not because they're being overly sensitive. I want to be attuned to a person and help them feel comfortable and be comfortable with them. So I don't think it's about oversensitivity. I think it's about recognizing that we could be offensive in all kinds of ways.
Exactly. We just want to be better people to be
Yeah.
around. You don't have to be like, oh, the woke mind, cancel culture got me.
Yeah.
You're just not fun to be around. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's a you problem. And I always laugh when people talk about trans people being so sensitive. And I'm like, okay, like we can play your little fantasy game. I know that you couldn't survive a day in a trans kid's, especially in the world you're creating.
Yeah.
You could not last a couple of hours in my shoes.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty like stone wall to that comment. I think it's hilarious because I know that they get triggered the second somebody says the word pronouns. That's sensitive, honey. That is very scary for you.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about exploration. We've touched on this before, but you talk about how some kids are trying to figure things out, and it's important to give people space to question and explore and to be on that journey with them without giving them the sense that your goal is to figure out if they're really trans or not or something.
Yes, definitely. Before I got my top surgery, had to see a therapist whose goal was to it was called gender exploratory therapy, which is a softer, kinder form of pseudo conversion therapy, where essentially a therapist will try to find any other reason that you might be transgender. So I would talk about real things that I was struggling with. Hey, I think I should break up with my girlfriend. I think I'm suicidal. And he would say, do you think you would still feel that way if you weren't transgender? Does being a man make this harder? And I was like, man, I just need help right now. I'm having a bad day. So his goal
But is it
was
because of the trans, Ben?
And so I then, even if I was having legit questions or doubts, I knew that I could not tell him because my only job was to convince him I was trans so that he would report back to my parents, hey, Ben can have this surgery that he really, really has been hoping for.
And by the way, little quick footnote, top surgery is the removal of breast tissue to shape the chest differently. Yeah, okay, go on.
Yeah. Top surgery was what I really wanted. And I knew that those sessions with that therapist were the barrier. I had to prove myself, which meant I could not ask questions. When we support our kids right away, we make it safer for them to say, hey, I'm feeling a little confused about this. And maybe you model that on your own behavior. You say, I'm feeling a little confused about whether I, want to dress this way or how I feel when people call me this thing. And creating regular conversations, making it normal for other people to talk about, I'm wondering this about, what it means for me to be a woman, or just talking to your kid about your own identity, making space for them to talk about theirs. As long as it doesn't seem like your goal is to sniff out any cracks in the theory that they're trans, when they feel like you see them as they are, they will trust you to be along with them when that journey evolves, or if that journey evolves.
And while all this is going on, it's also hard to navigate other people. So other relationships. They might be relatives, friends, grandparents, aunts and uncles, or whatever. How do you recommend people go about that?
Yeah, I would really say follow your kid's lead on that one, which I know I am constantly just beating that drum of, I don't know, ask your kid. There are lots of ways that you can check in with your kid. Maybe you say, okay, do you want me to come out for you? Do you want us to have that conversation together? Maybe we've got a huge extended family. How about we write a letter and we send it out to everybody, and then I'll talk on the phone with anybody who wants to afterwards, right?
So it sounds like you're giving some options too. You're not just like, you figure it out, kid. You're like, okay, here's some ideas. Where do you tend to want to go?
Absolutely. We are presenting our kids with a toolbox. We're not just
Yeah.
saying, okay, can you imagine how to build a house? We're saying, here are the tools. Which of them would you like to use? And recognizing and making sure you ask them, are there any people you feel not safe around? Are there any people you're worried about me telling? They, again, notice things that we do not notice because they have likely been nervous and data collecting and seeing who laughs at what. And if they say, hey, I don't feel safe coming out to this person, that's a really legit thing we got to listen to. It might be because they just assumed that, all of the cranky old men are not going to be okay with their they them pronouns, but it might also be, yeah, they said something to me privately that was really inappropriate or really unkind, or I see what they post on Facebook. I know you're not on social media. So making sure we check in with our kids about what are your gut feelings, what are your concerns, that we're listening to them, and again, just letting them lead the way.
And you emphasize not outing kids without their consent either, that they need to drive that process. What about parents that might be on different pages? So you're in the same household, but you have a partner or spouse who's not on board, or maybe an ex-partner, an ex-spouse, or an immediate caregiver. What are some ideas in that kind of circumstance?
Yeah, that is a really, really hard circumstance. I do not envy the folks who are in those positions. The biggest thing I would say is you got to start by aligning on values. So, do we align on the value that I love my kid, that I want them to feel loved by me? If we don't align on that value, then maybe that's a different conversation, right? If one of us is valuing love and one of us is valuing control and obedience, you get to decide what that value misalignment means for you and your partnership. And there are, different things are possible in different states, but getting value aligned and then asking a lot of questions. I can't get someone where I want them to go until I know where they're stuck. I can't give you directions to my house if I don't know where you're lost. So you can ask. It sounds like you're having a really hard time with our kids' pronouns, and that's been really hard for him. He mentions really being afraid to be around you. Help me understand. What are you stuck on? What about this is frightening or frustrating? Where are you at right now? What have you been hearing? What are your sources? I ask a tremendous amount of questions so I can truly understand. Because for a lot of parents, maybe it's, I don't want my kid to have a bad life. Maybe it's, I just have been hearing this as a phase. Maybe it's misinformation is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people get misinformed not because they are evil or stupid, but because they're online. We have all been misinformed. Misinformation comes for all of us. And so making a lot of space for asking questions, and when people feel actually heard, they're more likely to want to move forward. Not always. So at the end of the day, you get to decide where the line is of acceptable treatment for your kid, and consider drawing a hard line saying, okay, we need a year and I want you to be trying with our kids' pronouns, or I want our kid to feel safe seeing you at family gatherings, right? Wherever the line is. And if there's no hard line, that's okay too. That's a choice that your kid is also seeing you make. I know this is hard. I know this is really, I wish I had an easy, simple answer. It's such a challenging situation. And I encourage you to seek out groups like PFLAG that have a lot of supportive resources for so many parents who have been in a similar situation as well.
A core value here that really stood out to me was, when it comes down to it, someone's going to be uncomfortable in this kind of circumstance, right? Like if someone doesn't get it, they're going to be uncomfortable, or you're going to make your kid be uncomfortable. And you get to decide who needs to be the one who's uncomfortable. And for me, I really want to prioritize the marginalized person.
Yeah, people get so nervous about stirring the pot. They say, I'm just not going to do anything. Let's agree to disagree. Someone is going to be uncomfortable, whether it's, your partner because you called them out, or Uncle Joe because you said that's not funny, or your kid because Uncle Joe is making inappropriate jokes. Neutral is not an option. Neutral is picking, I'm going to let my kid continue to be uncomfortable. They are watching you make that choice.
Exactly. Some parents talk about how difficulties can crop up in their family or their relationships, and maybe feeling a moment of resentment about like, gosh, why did my kid have to be this way? Or this is really hard, and sort of feeling like, oh, this is either inconvenient or hard.
Yes.
What is your response to people who feel those kind of feelings?
Yeah, my very first response is just with a quick response of love of, you are not a bad person for being upset that things are harder, that you are experiencing more turmoil in your family. It's okay for that to be stressful and frustrating. You are not a bad person for having these feelings. So first, want to just give some quick love. The other thing I'd say is that we have to remember that that is a misplaced resentment, that it's
Mm.
not our kids' fault, that our family is not being as kind as we thought they were. And there's a quote I love about allyship that says, if you're trying to be my ally and the stones thrown at me aren't hitting you, you aren't standing close enough.
Mm.
Real allyship is not going to make us popular. And at some point, we have to recognize that if somebody is mad at us for doing allyship, it's because they'd like to see more exclusion.
Mm.
They would not like to see that person supported. And you get to decide how important that person's opinion of you is. Now, there's a grief of learning that people in our family were not as loving, as kind as we thought they were. That hurts. That's hard. And making space for that's really important.
Let's talk about that. You have a whole chapter called Processing Your Feelings, and you definitely focus on centering the feelings and experiences of the trans kid. They're the ones who are really going to get hit by the most stones, right? But you, as people are picking up on, you recognize loved ones might have complicated feelings about it, and you could tell people to just get over it, like stop making it about you, right? You could say that, but your whole chapter here is helping people process their feelings using this idea of ring theory. Talk about ring theory. This is helpful.
Yeah, so ring theory, I didn't create, and it was originally created to talk about people going through a devastating personal event. That essentially, when something happens to a person, obviously a trans kid coming out is not a devastating personal event, but I think the framework is helpful. When something happens, a person is at the center. It happens to them, and everyone in their life is a series of concentric rings around them based on how close they are to the situation. So we have the trans kid, we have parents, we have siblings. Next ring out, we'll have, family members, extended family, teachers, community members. And as you get further away from the person, you get in a further out ring. When you
Therapists.
are talking, yeah, therapists, exactly. When you are talking to somebody who is in a more central ring than you, it is only appropriate to direct comfort. When you are seeking support, you should look for someone in the same ring as you or in a ring that is further out than you, right? If somebody that you knew lost their home in the LA wildfires, for example, I would not call them and say, I'm feeling so much guilt and grief that you lost your home,
This
right?
is
That would
hard
be
for me.
appropriate. Yeah, that is not what that person needs right now.
Yeah.
I can call my friends who also have not lost their homes and say, I'm feeling really worried about my family member. Are you also worried about your family members? Right. And again, our trans kid coming out is not someone burning a house down, but they're in a world that is really hurting them in a pretty tremendous way right now. They need support directed in. Your emotions are extremely valid. You can have whatever feelings you're going to have. That's how feelings work. We don't get to control what happens in our emotions. We can only control what we do about it, how much we let them drive the car, and how we process those feelings. So look for people in your ring and in further out rings than you, because it's not going to help your kid for them to hear all about your grief. You can grieve. That's okay. Feel whatever feelings you want to. Your kid does not have the ability and the emotional space to process those emotions for you right now. They need to know that you're on their side.
This was really important, to not turn the kid into your therapist. To me, it's not really about honesty. I mean, I think a parent could say to a kid, like, hey, I really loved little girl you, like you, or little boy you, and I have so many memories of that and all these stories and things, and like maybe I could even still talk about that person. Can I still say she when I'm talking about the past you, or can I still say he? Or and I miss that person. And like, you do have all those feelings, but what is the kid supposed to do if you're putting that on the kid? Like you said, they're not in a place to have the emotional bandwidth or maybe even emotional maturity to reckon with those. And it might make them feel bad, actually.
Yeah, and it's really confusing for kids. I felt like I was the same person and everybody else was
Mm.
expecting me to be this total stranger. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I'm the guy in all those memories. I was on all those vacations. There wasn't some like random girl that I have killed. That was also me. I was just using a different name. And I really challenge families when they're thinking about grief to recognize like how many of those memories were specific to your child's gender identity.
Yeah.
How many of those were like, yes, let's all do the vagina dance? Like,
Yeah,
no,
no.
that's not. We went on vacation to Aruba. It doesn't matter what my genitals or my gender identity or my pronouns were. And like, I know that those words might be like, wow, Ben, that was a lot. But I think
No,
recognizing
I
that,
think when you put it that bluntly, it really draws out
yes,
what the root of it is, and it is a little strange when you think about it.
Do we know they're actually gone? Do we know what else are we gaining, right? Asking ourselves these questions, pumping the brakes
Yeah.
on that grief and saying, my kid is right here in front of me, being so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's amazing that they trust me with that. I am gaining something right now.
And I've heard excited, supportive parents say things like, I lost a son, but I gained a daughter. And even that can, again, when you frame it in terms of
that
your
never really
loss.
feels good.
Yeah.
Yes, you didn't lose your daughter. I was that person. I
Yeah.
have grown. It's the same as when you're a kid. Like I went to college, math and elementary education major, and I called my parents and was like, I think I want to major in theater. They had to grieve that too. Our kids defy our expectations constantly. We don't make quite as big a deal about it. And it's just that a lot of our expectations are based on gender. So we feel like
Yeah.
all the expectations are dead at once. But I still got married. My parents walked me down the aisle. I'm probably going to have kids with my wife. Like all these dreams they had for me that were specific to my gender, as it turns out, weren't.
Yeah, you go through a list of the kind of fears people have. Like you said, maybe the future that I thought they would have, they might not have, or basic fears for their safety, which is a very reasonable thing to be afraid of. Being afraid of their mental and emotional health, and the higher risks of self-harm that happen with trans folks because of societal oppression. They might have religious beliefs that are challenged. They might actually have scientific quote unquote beliefs that are challenged by it, not realizing that they just had a view of bad science. Like I've heard people say, well, I believe in science and there's boys and girls and science says it, and I'm not letting go of that. So there are all kinds of fears that you want caregivers and friends and loved ones of trans folks to process. And again, the important thing is there's plenty of resources they can lean on, not to put that on the shoulders of the person who's going through it. That's kind of the important key.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to therapy, join a support group, find a friend, journal, go to the gym, like find any place you can to process and work this out. Not with your kid. They are not qualified. They might be a master's in social work person. Fine. Then pay them for their time, for their clinical hours. Your
Yeah.
kid is not your therapist.
Get a friend who's a therapist and then take them on walks and get free therapy. That's no, just kidding to all my therapist listeners. Although that I would like to hear from them about how often that happens. Let's talk about some joy exercises and some ways to make the home better, more comfortable. You got some just great practical ideas, some great tips about how to celebrate, how to really integrate your kid into your home. Talk about some of your favorite ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big one is marking important dates in your loved one's transition, whether it is a date of a certain surgery or the day they came out. I celebrate my coming out day. I call it my rebirth day. I celebrate my top surgery day. We always just get an ice cream cake that says chop chop baby, because that's what I told my parents right before they rolled me back. So having these moments where we celebrate these things is such a strong way of sending a message that says, hey, I'm not just tolerating this. This is not something that you put me through. This is a good thing worth celebrating. It doesn't have to mean like I will be upset if you are no longer transgender, but celebrating those moments is so awesome, and marking those as important things. Having a gender re-reveal party where you celebrate your loved one's new identity, or transition shower or whatever it is. Having those moments of celebration is awesome. And then we can also do things like having a misgendering jar, right? Let's say we're early in the journey, we're having a real tough time getting our loved ones' pronouns right. So we got a little jar on top of the pantry, and every time we use the wrong pronouns, that's a quarter or $1 in the jar. And then the kid gets to use a full jar to go out to ice cream because they most certainly need it if they've gotten misgendered enough that jar is full. And it just having
I like, by the way, that
tactical
you extend that to stuff outside the home too. Like if someone else is misgendering them too, you could be like, you could have a deal with them like, hey, I'm going to put $1 in the jar if this happens to you out in public or something. Like we're gonna try to find a way to do something happy about this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Finding a way to say, I recognize this is hard, and we have now built together what the reaction to this might be, rather than saying every time you need to come up with a new way to respond, to correct somebody, and to decide whether or not it's worth it to critique me, even though I used the wrong pronoun 10 seconds ago and you also corrected me then. We take that mental wheels spinning out of it when we just say, okay, $1 in the jar.
Yeah, I like the idea of putting up new photos too, getting new photos. And here, I think this is some good tips for parents just dealing with teens in general, is like kind of being into their fashion or being a lot of times parents maybe more so in the past very much policed appearance and was all about like controlling kids' appearance. I like the idea of sitting down and being like, hey, let's look at some haircuts or let's look at some hairstyles, and like maybe we're going to take you to a barber shop or maybe we're going to take you to a salon, or like what do you like, and being part of, hey, they might need some new clothes that could help mitigate their dysphoria. They might, you talk about the giant hoodie is like a staple for you.
Yes, the giant hoodie is very much a hallmark of trans mask fashion. And I remember, my mom, when I first came out, was having a really hard time and was like, well, you can wear gray because gray is a really masculine color. And was like not really on board with me wearing men's clothes. And I really remember the first time she came home from the mall and was like, hey, I got you these couple of colorful men's button downs. This seems kind of like your style. Do you like these? And she started to learn my style and buy me men's clothes or just take me to shop and say, okay, what do you like? What feels good? And having those moments was so like sent such a clear message of support of, okay, let's help you find a new style. And then I would have fashion shows for my whole family of like, hey, look at all these cool new button downs that I just got. And they could get excited with me. And that meant so much to know they were having fun on this journey with me, because it's not meant to be a sad, hard, lonely business casual journey. It could be fun.
Right. I mean, this gets us back to that subtitle of the book, A Joy-Centered Approach to Support. And again, I want to remind people the book is called My Child is Trans, Now What? By Ben V. Greene. So we talked about your high school experience at the top of the interview. Back then, you talk about working as hard as you could to have an answer to every question, to kind of be the model trans minority. And by the end of high school, you were actually really burnt out by it. You felt like you wanted to stop talking about it and just go stealth and just go on with your life because it took such a toll on your mental and emotional health. What kind of exhausted you most? And then how did you get back to it? Because now, as you said, it's like it's your career.
Yeah, I was so burned out because not only was I answering questions on behalf of myself. If it was just for myself, I could say, okay, another person wants to know why I use he, him pronouns. I'm not going to answer right now because I'm just so tired. But very quickly, once I came out, all these kids reached out to me, came out of the woodwork and said, hey, you're trans, you came out. How did that go for you? Do you think they might be ready for me to come out? And so the weight was very, very clear that if I said something that made somebody upset, that made them insecure, that didn't answer their question, they were going to be even less inclusive to the next kid who came. And it felt all of a sudden like it was my responsibility to make the school safe enough for all these kids. So I was just taking on a tremendous amount of responsibility because none of the adults were doing that, right? I was writing the policies, I was teaching the health classes. In some ways, that was fun to have a lot of adult responsibilities. In other ways, it was a lot. I was a kid. I was 15 years old and taking on the role of all the adults who failed to show up for me. I have a statement I like to make that sometimes grinds people's gears or makes them a little nervous, but there's no such thing as an old soul. There's only a child who you let down. Um, it's a heavy statement, but I was an old soul because I had to
Had
be
to
an
be.
adult to be safe. And so that was really hard. And people only ever saw me as a trans person. They didn't want to talk about my hobbies, my interests, my
Yeah.
classes. Like I was just a trans person, and then their conversation was over once I asked her the question. So I was a trans person who happened to be Ben. When I went to college, the people I was meeting had some questions, sure, but generally, they'd already had them answered. They'd met trans people before. So all of a sudden, I was Ben who happened to be a trans person.
Yeah.
Learned how to set boundaries and how to say there are certain stories that are really personal to me that I don't tell anymore. I don't tell stories that really upset me to share or that just feel really deeply personal because those stories are for me. Those are a gift that I will choose to give that vulnerability to others. But building up that strategy of doing this intentionally and getting to choose this and getting to put this down at the end of the day. I think when I was a kid, I did not really have very many spaces or people who I knew that I was never going to have to answer a question for them. I was that for everybody, and
Mm.
that was exhausting. exhausting. So now I know as a trans adult, when my friends come over to play board games, they are not asking about politics unless I say, okay, I've got a little extra energy today. What political questions do you all have?
Hmm.
And then they will ask all their questions, but they wait until they know I've got room for it. And I know that my wife doesn't wonder whether I'm really a lesbian. Like, she's good. She's got me. She's here. We're locked in. So having those boundaries has been really helpful, but it definitely will always be a wound in my heart that I did not get to have a childhood as myself. I had a childhood as a person who, before I transitioned, and then I was an adult. People
Mm.
think I'm a lot older than I am because I've been an adult since I was 15.
Now, you really highlight minority stress theory, and
Mm.
this is talking about how to protect our person's mental and emotional health. You went through it. What does minority stress theory teach us about this?
Yes, minority stress theory is essentially developed about 25 years ago now in the late 90s to talk about the ways that being a member of a minority group, and especially being multiply marginalized, being a trans person of color or a disabled woman, uh, weighs on us, on our mental and physical health. It talks about the impact of actual and anticipated discrimination on our blood pressure, our sleep, our ability to focus and concentrate, our diabetes risks, so much of our health,
Mm.
because I'm walking through the world spinning those wheels, like I mentioned earlier, always trying to figure out who around me is safe. Spinning those wheels is not a neutral act. That's not good for us. It's not good to always be worried. Am I safe right now? That's really challenging. So making sure that we can build spaces, the biggest resilience factors for minority stress theory that protect us against those physical and mental health impacts are things like community connectedness and pride. So not being isolated, feeling like there are other people like us, feeling pride in our identities, and having people around us who give us love have positive health impacts. Your child's health will be better if you love them. This is scientifically proven. And that's so it really cannot be understated the role that building and finding safe spaces
Mm.
our loved ones can go to, whether that's just in our house with one friend over, or going to a weekly community support hangout, or watching movies with trans characters. Anything we can do to contribute to that safety, that pride, that connectedness is so critical.
And you mentioned earlier the therapy that you had that seemed to kind of try to figure out if you were really trans or try to make everything about whether you were trans or not. The book lays out kind of three types of therapy, broadly speaking, that as parents or caregivers are thinking about getting their kiddo into therapy, they might wonder. You talk about affirming therapy. You talk about a sort of investigation therapy, which is the kind you experienced where they're trying to figure out if you're really trans. And then there's still examples of conversion therapy where being trans is wrong, evil, bad. The purpose of therapy is to try to shape that person, change them, make them not trans, convince them that they're cisgender. When people hear affirming therapy, they might mistake that to be this culture war thing about being woke and like they're converting our kids and turning them all trans. And if you take them to an affirming therapist, that means that they're going to force them to be trans or make them to be trans. That's not what affirming therapy is all about. Give us a quick idea of what affirming therapy means.
Yeah, affirming therapy starts by saying, when you tell me who you are, I believe you and I support you. I will use the correct language to refer to you, and I will follow your lead. I have had three therapists. I had my therapist when I was really early into coming out. I had that therapist in the middle who I had some challenges with. And now I have a therapist who is highly affirming member of the LGBTQ community. She is the only one with which I can question my gender identity, even though she is the most confident
Exactly.
about my identity is. When I feel seen, I am safe to explore. We need a safe kind of home base to come back to know if I say this question, you're not going to immediately start using the wrong pronouns for me, because then I don't feel safe anymore. So affirming therapy just says, you lead the way. I will see you however you tell me you want me to see you.
Mm. Therapy can be really important. And again, it's something to really take the temperature on and be plugged into a young person and where their mental health is at. Therapy can be life-saving. It's a tool that I'm grateful it exists. Going back to an earlier question, so we talked about the stresses that you went through and the strains on your mental health. What brought you back around to making this the focus of your career?
Yeah, kind of fell into it. I was in college. I was planning to be a third grade teacher, and I had an opportunity to give a TEDx talk. And I gave this talk, and it totally blew up online. And all these companies found it, said, wow, that was amazing. Do you do this professionally? And they said, we'll even give you $100. And I was like, wow, $100. That's so much ramen. This is
Cha-ching.
amazing.
Ramen, yes.
Taking the train down to New York City to give these presentations for conferences and workplaces. And after the second or third presentation, I was in the car with my dad going back to the train. And I said, I know I'm in the guaranteed career path to be a teacher, but I think I owe it to myself and to my community to see if this might be something.
Hmm.
I think I might be really good at this. And so it took a lot of convincing to tell my parents I want to be a public speaker and
Hmm.
make my own business. And they were very like, is that a real career path? My parents, my wife, everybody was like, what is this guy doing?
Hmm.
I was really pretty committed that this is the world I want to build and this is what I want to be doing. So 2019, I filed the paperwork to graduate college early and leave my education program and go full time into speaking work. And I've pretty much just followed the philosophy, be the person you needed when you were younger.
Hmm.
So I'm going to help workplaces. I'm going to help work with families and writing books and fantasy books with trans protagonists and just being that person that I know would have made such a difference for me as a scared, lonely trans kid, getting to be that so no other kids have to experience transition the way that I did.
And I love that you kind of found that yourself. You talk about the off-Broadway play that you went to where you saw a trans actor and were like, wait a minute, like, this is amazing. It really touched you.
Yeah, that I always call that my cry story. So warning in
Oh.
advance. I had never seen a trans adult before. It did not occur to me when I was first coming out that I would grow up. I thought I would maybe go to
Huh.
college and live to around 20 and then just disappear. And then I met this trans actor. I saw him performing in a play where he had a romantic lead and a happy ending, and my mind was blown. I'd never seen anything like it before. So I sat in my seat planning out everything I was going to say to him. I was going to say, Ian, I've never seen someone like myself represented on stage before. It gives me so much hope for myself and for my future as a trans man. And we'd take a picture. He'd sign my playbill. It was going to be great. We'd come into this lobby after. I'm on one side, he's on the other. Take one look at him. I open my mouth and I just start sobbing.
Oh.
Could not get a word out. He comes up to me. He pulls me in. He starts crying. We're crying in each other's arms. And after a couple of minutes, he says, this is it. This is why representation matters. And told me the story of how he had the exact same thing happen to him 20 years before. The
Wow.
first he saw a transgender person on stage. And that was an incredibly formative moment for me for just so many reasons.
It's like truth. You experienced this moment of truth beyond words. It took the words away. It was like too true, too real to articulate even.
Yes, absolutely. It was just so like my entire worldview broke. My view that transgender people did not get to be adults, did not get to fall in love, all was falling apart live while hugging this stranger and also person that I knew perfectly well.
See, this is why community matters so much, and you have a whole chapter on community support. I really liked your idea of the bullseye approach a lot.
Yeah, when we are looking for resources, people always jump to the big ones. Trevor Project is a popular one. And I love the Trevor Project, but they are trying to cast a net over the entire country to catch LGBTQ plus youth everywhere. That is a huge net. That is a huge population. People are going to fall through those cracks. When we are looking for resources, as well as when we're looking to donate and to give and volunteer our time and other resources, the more local we get, the further our impact is going to go. Right? If I'm having a mental health crisis, I'm going to call the St. Louis Queer Support Hotline, Squish, because I know they know exactly what news article I'm freaking out about.
Hmm.
I know they know who the local doctor is who might have some extra availability. They are hyper focused on supporting me. Their net is the same amount of string, a lot tighter net. So it's
Hmm.
much harder for somebody to fall through the cracks. So getting involved with local as we can, right? Following that bullseye, starting with our metropolitan area, our city, our neighborhood, then going out to maybe our county, and going to our state level resources, and then looking to our national resources. Some things, there's only going to be national resources, but where we can, looking to donate locally, volunteer, and ask for support locally, we are going to get highly tailored support, and we are going to make a bigger impact. $10 to the Trevor Project, I don't know what they need my $10 for. And I do think they are run by a lot of small donations. So don't not donate to Trevor Project. Don't tell them I said, please don't donate to them. But $10 to my local trans community center puts a meal on somebody's table who wasn't going to get to eat this week. I know exactly where that $10 is going and just how badly they need it.
All right. Well, Ben, for sake of time, I'm going to skip over some questions about medical transition and how it works. If people are curious about that, I have an earlier episode with Eris Young, and we
Awesome.
talk about the book They, Them, There, and we have some discussion in there about medical transition, and future episodes of Relationscapes. We'll talk about that as well. Right now, I want to talk about your chapter about changing the world, and we're seeing a huge wave of disinformation and misinformation right now about trans folks. It's truly difficult and scary times. Trans folks are a political football right now, and you suggest that when we're thinking about how to convince people, because we've got to have these conversations, we need to persuade people to care about this. You suggest we start by figuring out if a person's actually open to learning about the issue, or if they're just out there being a troll or just being sort of a political activist whose mind is made up. How can people determine who it's worth taking time to talk to about this?
Yeah. Number one, general litmus test. If you are in a comments section, the answer is no. The answer is not that they are trying to have a productive political conversation in a Facebook comment. No, they're not. So first, take this conversation where possible into a safe one-on-one environment. If you do not feel safe in a one-on-one environment, whether that's a phone call or in person, that's our big red flag number one. That, hey, my body, my nervous system is letting me know this person is not safe. If they are making comments about violence, if they are retweeting things from QAnon or are really big Elon Musk fans, like there are certain red flags we're going to have with the
J.K.
caveat.
Rowling.
Big J.K. Rowling fans. She is a notorious leader of the transphobes over in the UK, and like writing policy, not just being mean online. She's having tangible negative impact. I digress. We have to recognize that we should always leave room for people to surprise us. I have a lot of people in my life who I never would have expected to become supportive, but it's hard to hate up close. So recognizing that misinformation does not only work on bad people or stupid people, and I know I've said that earlier too, and then asking questions, finding where we can value align. Hey, we both love our family member, right? And we want them to feel like they want to come home for Thanksgiving because we noticed they've stopped coming recently. I wonder if that's because of the jokes you make every year, right? Asking a lot of questions to say, I need to figure out where you're stuck, where we can align on values. If they are frequently laughing, if they are just constantly parroting slogans, they are probably not going to be open. You could also ask point blank, hey, I want to talk to you about this. And I'm curious if you want to know what I have to say, and I want to know what you have to say too, right? It has to go both ways. People can tell, just like I can tell when somebody thinks I am some woke mind virus left-wing nut job. People can tell when you come into a conversation thinking they are a redneck Bible-thumping bigot. They are just as closed off as we are when we can tell somebody thinks that we are a little bit loopy. And so coming into those conversations saying, I genuinely want to hear what you have to say, doesn't mean because I think they might be right. Oh, maybe I don't deserve rights all along. Like that's not what it's about. But I see you as a person with baggage and fears and trauma. And trauma is never the word they're going to use, but it's a word we should be using much more often when we talk about deeply conservative rural folks or people who are really hateful. They got a lot of wounds in them that are making them that cruel. So making space for them to talk about how they formed these opinions, what they're worried about. And if they're just making violent comments, if they're really angry, maybe that's not the right conversation to have. Or maybe we have that in little pieces, just reminding them about the impact of their words. You can believe whatever you want to. Your nephew doesn't want to see you anymore. Does that feel like what family is supposed to mean to you? Your Facebook political beliefs are worth sacrificing, seeing your brother?
But Ben, that's because they're so close-minded against my transphobic attitudes. I thought you guys were tolerant.
So the tolerant laugh.
Yeah, exactly. So you also say you've sometimes questioned yourself whether you're doing enough. And that's interesting to see because this is part of your life. You made it part of your career. But you try to remind people that the quote here is, there's no such thing as enough. Now, that might sound discouraging. That might be like, well, if there's no such thing as enough, then I'm going to go watch TV. See you later. But you actually make this sound optimistic, and it speaks to the kind of hope that you have right now.
Yeah, I am above all else relentlessly optimistic because I know there are so many people who are doing everything they can, which looks very different for different people of what their bandwidth and their capacity and their resources and knowledge are. There are different levels of involvement, but there's never going to be a button someone can press that's the equality button, that somebody is going to press the button and get all the credit and everything will be fixed. There is no ticker tape finish line that we will cross and there will be no more fights to fight. That's not what victory is going to look like in this. It will be a series of countless small actions and countless small victories that pile up like an avalanche to big actions, to big victories, but they are all just a series of small actions. So there's no such thing as enough, because enough implies that the world will be fixed if I have done enough. There will always be further to go. So there's no such thing as enough. You can never do enough, which also means that everything you do is enough because you are doing your best and you are trying and getting involved. And some people are so afraid they can't do enough that they don't start at all. Start by doing something. That is enough because you are trying. So just keep recognizing that we're looking for those little victories. We are not trying to press the equality button and win on day one. We will always be moving forward.
Now, that's like a really hopeful way to end. And that would be an obvious question to end with so that everybody feels all happy and good. But I want to ask this next, which is, allyship is a lifelong journey and mistakes are going to be made. And sometimes people are going to get called out and sometimes people who want to be allies are going to mess up. And I wondered if you had any stories about that where you learned something new about it, like, ooh, you got called out for something, or where it was a moment of growth for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big, really interesting learning journey about allyship for me has been as I have started passing more as male, I've learned that I exist now on both polar ends of the privilege spectrum, in that I am a transgender person in Missouri, one of the most targeted vulnerable groups right now. And when people don't know that, I am a white man with relative financial comfort and a wife who is also white and stable housing. So I'm on both ends of the privilege spectrum. And when I first transitioned, I didn't go on testosterone, and I was like, people all thought that I was either like a lesbian or a little boy. So nobody was that intimidated by me. And I started tea a few years ago, and my shoulders got broader and my voice got deeper. And I remember I had spent a lot of my young years as a young girl learning all these ways that we keep ourselves safe, including you get on public transportation late at night, find another woman and sit next to her. You will keep each other safe that way. So that was always what I did. And I got on some bus at like midnight, and there was a woman, and I said, okay, I got to keep us both safe. I'll go and sit next to her. And all of a sudden, she tensed up, and I had this moment of like, oh, whoa, I know I did not become any more threatening to her. I know I did not become any more violent. And I know that she doesn't know that. And I can't say, don't worry, I'm not creepy, because that's way creepier. And
Yeah.
so I have recognizing that the way I am perceived is very different now that I've got a beard and a deep voice. And so I both need allyship as a trans person and as a white guy, am always giving allyship to my friends who are women, my friends who are people of color. And I am constantly learning new ways about how the way I'm perceived sometimes is as a threat. Sometimes it means people take what I have to say way more seriously than they would coming from a woman or a trans person of color or a trans kid. I'm a trans adult. So I know that sometimes this appearance gives me extra credibility that I can use to support other people. And sometimes it means that I need to do a little bit of extra legwork to make sure that, a woman alone in the gym with me knows that I am not staring at her butt or doing things that might make her feel uncomfortable. So I'm always figuring out how can I be showing up in a way that is compassionate and safe and using whatever privilege and positionality I have to be an ally to other people.
Yeah, so that advice goes to everybody. Be aware of your positionality. In other words, recognize how you appear and how you come across can impact and affect other people. See yourself in relationship to other people, and then
Yeah.
act in ways that make people feel safe and supported. And yeah, so everyone can take that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Privilege is not a moral failing. It is a superpower that you can choose to use to help other people. That's great.
That's Ben V. Greene. We're talking about his book, My Child is Trans. Now What? A Joy-Centered Approach to Support. You can follow his Substack, Good Queer News. Also check out his website, bgtranstalks.com. All right, Ben, we always like to close episodes with regrets, challenges, and surprises. This is a choose-your-own adventure. You can speak to any of these. Anything you would change about the book now that it's out? Any regrets you have about it? What was the hardest part about putting this project together? Or something new that you learned? Because you've done a lot of talks. This book is kind of probably the outgrowth of a lot of work already. So maybe there weren't a lot of surprises here. But You can speak to any of those.
Yeah, I'll say with the challenges, with the regrets, obviously there are typos. They tell you as an author, the second your book is published, never look at it again because you will immediately find a typo. That's
Yeah.
true. I know where it is. I'm not telling you, but I know where it is. Haunts me. There are some comma splices. That's my weakness.
Yeah.
So biggest regrets is that's always going to be there. More things I've learning and more things I can add. But challenge wise, there were so many people who said, you're not the right person to write this book. You don't have a master's in social work. You are not, a parent of a trans kid. So many people did not believe in me and believe in this book. You don't have a big enough social media following, but we've sold over 5,000 copies,
Oh,
which is
wow.
just outstanding for
Yeah.
a relatively unknown author writing a first-time niche nonfiction book.
That's a hit book for any publisher. I think most people don't
Yeah.
realize how few books really sell and how few books are huge. Like
Mhm.
5,000 copies is a very successful book.
Yeah, but there were a lot of people. I mean, it's been 6 years, and that was not just 6 years of me working on it. It was 6 years of really trying. I applied to, like, 85 agents before I found one, and we went
Wow.
out to so many different publishers, and it was a real challenging journey to figure out, and there were moments where my agent sat me down and was like, "Okay, Ben, I think this book might be dead right now, and maybe we'll come back to it in a couple years and
Mm.
start thinking about what other books you might wanna write." But there were a lot of moments where I didn't think this book was gonna happen.
Wow. I mean, that surprises me. I have to say, Ben, I'm so glad that it did because this is the book. This is the first book that I'll recommend to people. There's a lot of great books. And I'm talking to a lot of great authors, but the way you've written the book and what you decided to cover and how you decided to cover it, I think is a really great and clear introduction. This is, to me, like the first go-to book.
Thank you. I really that means so much to me. This book is my baby. I'm so excited to have it out in the world helping people. That's all I could ask for.
Well, Ben, keep up the good work. Thanks for being willing to come talk to us about it on Relationscapes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute delight.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Relationscapes. I really enjoyed talking to Ben, and I highly recommend following his Substack, Good Queer News. It's terrific. It's not the kind of toxic positivity that papers over the tough stuff that we're facing right now, but it is hopeful and energizing while also being really realistic. Also, thanks to those who went and reviewed the show in Apple Podcasts over the past couple weeks. I got one that called the show the best podcast of all time. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. I mean, that might be a stretch, but... But thanks for the vote of confidence. That's amazing. You can rate and review the show. Just go to Apple Podcasts, search the show, go down to ratings and reviews, and leave your thoughts there. You can also rate the show in Spotify. That's just a star rating system. So I don't want to put my thumb on the scale too much, but 5 stars, that sounds good to me. I'm just scrolling down through the episodes that I've put out so far and looking for the ones that resonate with this one. If you're interested in hearing more about transgender issues, you could check out Black and Beyond the Binary with KB Brookins, or What the News Isn't Telling You about Trans Teenagers with Nico Lang. You might enjoy Trans in the Latter Days with Lori Lee Hall, or The Challenges of Parenting Trans Kids with Abby Maxwell, and of course, an episode with my friend Eris Young called Non-Binary Thinking. And many of the other episodes at least touch on transgender issues, so just go through the whole back catalog. Let's go. Mates of State provides our theme song. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, a journalist in Salt Lake City, and I'll see you on another episode of Relationscapes.